I mean, this is the issue the church has had its head in the sand about for the last 30, 40 years. And we should have been addressing it back in the 60s and 70s.
Welcome to thesextalk.com, where parents can go to get clear and confident to have the sex talk with their kids.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Sex Talk Podcast. I am excited. I have something special for you today. I have the CEO of BetterMan with us, Chris Harper. Chris, man, tell us a little bit more about yourself. I, of course, could, but I think you're going to do it better justice. Tell me a little bit about your family. Tell me a little bit about your position, and tell me why you're on the Sex Talk Podcast, man.
Come on, brother. So good to be with you, and just honored to be here. Yeah, I live in Texas. My bride and I, we live in Texas with our 4 kids, Scarlett, Malachi, Calvin, and Oliver. So I've got 4 kids under the age of 12, which means I haven't slept 5 years. And and Allie and I have been married for, I guess, going on 16 years now. Her grandfather discipled me. That's how we met.
Okay.
So I'll never forget. I meet his granddaughter, and I told him, I said, "Hey, my track record's not great. Like, I don't want to screw this up." And he's like, "Well, then you better not mess it up."
Wow. I've never heard of a story like that. A grandfather discipling a man that ends up marrying his granddaughter.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So it was. Yeah, we joke and say it was an arranged marriage. So super good. But yeah, man, we're doing life in Texas, and I have the privilege of serving at BetterMan. So we write content and curriculum basically for the local church, helping church. We call it winning the church back to men. And we basically give men the clarity around what it means to be God's man in the 21st century. And then we encourage the community for them to do life together. So get to do that every day. It's a great honor.
That's amazing, man. Yeah, I get to watch from afar all the work that you guys are doing with BetterMan, and it's amazing. It goes without saying that for men listening right now, like, we want dads to take such an active role in raising up their children with a biblical sexuality, and that's such a huge part of the sex talk. And so, Chris, like, with your family, you're really in the pocket right now, man. So what's your experience with you and your wife, and how are you guys engaging, raising your children up with a biblical sexuality? Because here's the reality. It is everywhere in our world. Brokenness, sexual darkness, promiscuity, hookup culture. You can't keep your little ones from it. So how are you guys equipping and protecting your kids right now?
Man, that's so good. A lot in that question, and it's so good. One of the things we do, we have younger kids, and I'm a big catechism guy.
Love
so
it.
You would think I'm old school Presbyterian if you ever walked into my house. Like we've got you, and we've got hymnals, and we've literally got catechism questions on the wall, and so one of the things we do is we do questions and answers, where we're reinforcing biblical and theological truths.
Okay.
So, like, if you ask my 3-year-old, how and why did God create us? Right? He would respond and say, He created us male and female, and He created us for His glory. Right? Now, he doesn't know what that means. I mean, he eats crayons, bro. He's not smart. Like, he's a 3-year-old, right? It's not. It's not like he's some sort of genius. But what's happening is those truths are being implanted deep, not just in his mind, but in his heart. So as he grows, I'm unlocking more and more of that truth as he can understand it. The truth, for example, sexuality, that God has created us male and female, like, that truth has been ingrained in him since he was 2 years old. So one of the ways we're doing it is by making sure our kids are learning those foundational theological truths from an early age. And then another way we do it on the prevention side is we're big on limiting screens and limiting what our kids have access to.
Amen.
Yeah, yeah. My
Tell me
daughter,
more. What does that mean?
yeah, like for example, my daughter just started middle school this week.
Okay, so she would be what age then?
She's 12, going
12.
in
Okay.
seventh grade, and I'm pretty sure she's the only kid in her class that doesn't have a cell phone.
And for every parent listening right now, they're like, oh my goodness, Chris, you're that parent.
That's right.
Yet, tell me why you guys have done that.
Because it's a cell phone, especially a smartphone, it's no longer a device just to communicate with and through. It's an actual tool. It's a computer.
Yes.
There is more information at the tips of our fingers than in most libraries in the world. And that's not just good information. As a matter of fact, I think the majority of the information, images, et cetera, are bad. So giving a 12-year-old unlimited access to content, images, et cetera, is basically the equivalent of handing them a loaded gun and not teaching them how to use it. And
Which
then,
is a horrifying thought to think about. That's a perfect analogy.
well, and then on the backside of that is, why would a 12-year-old need a loaded gun anyways? So
Amen.
like both points. So to me, she's not at a mature enough level to where she could handle that type of content information. She's also 12 and doesn't need a computer. Books are a great thing. You can read lots of books. And we're just, there's no real big safety concerns.
Yeah.
I remember when her school went phone free, so the kids have to turn in their phones
Love that.
at the beginning of the day, and there was all kinds of parent blowback, right? Well, what if my child needs to get a hold of me during the day? Well, the office has a phone, bro. Like that's what we used. And I never wanted to call my parents. Like that was a
Right?
bad thing. And so I think we forget that like there was a time that we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have the internet and everything was fine. Like we all made it. So those will be, and that's anecdotal. Like we limit television time. Like
Mm.
we don't allow our kids to have screens in their rooms by themselves. I mean, doing some of those kind of nuanced things where we're just super protective.
Which I think is so important to acknowledge because at the beginning of this conversation, you started with your 3-year-old and you said, hey, we're catechizing them. Hey, we're equally proactively pouring into them about men and women and how God made them. And then simultaneously, you have a good defense. Your defense is no screens, less television, very controlled environments. Man, I love the loaded gun analogy. That's so perfect. And I think parents oftentimes are looking for an excuse or a reason to say, hey, we really think these cell phones are bad. I mean, I think any parent listening right now, like you can latch on to that gun analogy because that is what it is. There's no reason they need to have this powerful tool in their pockets. I've heard it said once, they're God machines. This unadulterated access to all of this content. Sure, we have some parents that get their kids a smartwatch because guess what? It can still make phone calls and or a dumb phone. So if you're the parent listening and you're like, but my child might need to get a hold of me for an emergency, even in the 21st century, we have the ability for you to not plug your children into the internet and expose them to the worst things imaginable. And Chris, I got a question for you. So you guys have a pretty great offense, a pretty great defense. With your 12-year-old specifically, she's a little bit more in the world, right? So she is outside of your home, outside of your controls and your protection. What are you and your wife doing to help her still have biblical sexual integrity when she's out there and not under your immediate protection? What if her friend has a smartphone? What if her friends are getting into something that like how are you guys coming alongside of her as she begins to slowly exit your home over time, right? Culminating in college and marriage and things of that nature.
Yeah, that's good. Again, man, such a great question. Ultimately, she's God's, right? And
Yes.
God has given her to me to steward well.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, I can't control everything. But to answer that question, so first, when she is with me and my wife, one of the big things we do is model healthy biblical sexuality.
Love it. Tell me more.
We are very intentional about modeling healthy gender roles, modeling, how men are supposed to treat women, women treat men, how men act like men, women act like women. Everything from, as a husband, I'm constantly having to die to myself to honor and to love and serve my wife. And then my wife is teaching her about modesty, and the importance of modesty. So we've been blessed. Those early principles, and I don't want people to hear me say that it's too late if you didn't do this, but I'll give you a great example of this. And this is actually with I've got an 11-year-old son. Okay. So same principles since he's 2, healthy sexuality, this and that. So he went over for a play date at a friend's house, and my wife goes to pick him up later that afternoon. It's a trusted friend, right? And they were going to watch, him and his buddy were going to watch a cartoon, some sort of cartoon that was kind of semi-innocent.
Yeah.
And he told his buddy, hey, I don't think I'm allowed to watch that. Right. And his buddy was like, cool, we won't watch it. But like, he didn't have to do that. Like, there were no adults around.
Yes.
So, and then I took him, my son's to an age now where I take him to my barber shop.
Oh, cool.
My barber cuts his hair.
That's cool.
And we walked into the barber shop not too long ago. And again, not pornography, but I think like MTV or something was one of the channels, right? And I mean, that's basically softcore porn, most of it.
Oh, it is. Absolutely.
And, there's music videos on, and I look at him in the chair and he won't look up.
That's amazing.
I said, Malachi, man, you all right? He's like, Dad, there's inappropriate stuff on the TV. And I said, hey, ask him to change it. And he looked at the barber. He's like, hey, could you put something else on? And I'm like, that's my guy, right?
Dude.
So like, not only was he convicted, but then I was able to teach him to follow it up with courage.
Yes.
And dude, what's so great is not only did the barber change it, but now when Malachi comes in for an appointment, bro, he already has the TVs on a different channel. It's amazing.
Dude, that's the best dad story ever. And so if I'm listening right now and like, I want my son to have that level of integrity, that level of courage, I think it's worth acknowledging that you and your wife have done a lot of work to help him get to that point. Maybe speak a little bit more about that with him, with Malachi. Like, how have you coached him? Obviously, this is a great example, but like in that example, you said you showed him the opportunity for leadership in, hey, go ask him. Hey, so like that didn't just happen out of nowhere. So tell me a little bit more about how you were able to build that into your 11-year-old, because I would imagine it started way earlier.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing in that is parents sometimes equate protecting their kids from worldly things with ignoring worldly things.
That's good.
Right? That's not protection. That's ignorance. Literally, that's the root word. It's ignorance. So the reality is, man, we live in a fallen, broken world. Whether it's overly sexualized or it's distorted sexualization, it's everywhere. So what we've done is that when our children have stumbled upon that, whether it accidentally, we're watching the Super Bowl and a couple about two, a commercial about 2 gay men pop up, instead of ignoring that, we immediately address it. Like I remember my son watching his first commercial featuring, a homosexual couple. And instead of pretending like that didn't happen or quickly trying to change the channel, I look at him and say, hey, bro, do you understand what's happening right now? Well, let's process this. Right. And to what his mind, and his heart can handle, bro, we immediately start to process that. We don't run from it. We don't put our head in the sand. We address it. And then we point to what God's word says and how God has defined sexuality. So that's been super helpful. My son at the age of 11, my daughter at the age of 12, we can be in a crowd and they could basically tell you when something is right or wrong concerning sexuality.
Dude, that's so much of the hard work. I think people don't realize that. Parents don't realize that. That's 90% of the work.
Yeah.
Because so many parents that we engage with our work in ministry, I'll have a mom or a dad of a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, and they'll basically say, hey, we've been doing our best to protect our kids. I really haven't had much of the sex talk with them at all yet. When should I start? And everything inside of me screams. And it's like, if you haven't been on the offense for the last 10 years, starting around the age of 3, then I'm so sorry to say it's going to be a little bit more hard work right now, because inevitably those horror stories happen where that 13 or 14-year-old, the mom will start talking to him, the son, and find out, oh, wow, you've already been looking at porn for the last 4 years. And we are just now finding out. And the worst stories are they're a gender confused child and they started at 14 and they should have started because the world, to your point, I say this all the time, I can't even let my children watch the Super Bowl. So you hit the nail on the head with the Super Bowl commercials. And for a parent listening right now, that's one thing we want to encourage. We want them to feel the burden lifted. Like, God made sex and God made sexuality. There's nothing that God made that we should be afraid to talk about. So like, Chris, I love in your family that if you see something twisted by the enemy, you are literally creating moments of pause and time for not like a whole lecture, but instruction around, hey, like, you see that's a twist from the enemy, right? Like, you see what they're doing right now. I think so many parents think they're exposing their children by doing that. Like, it's better if we don't acknowledge that there was a same-sex couple on the commercial right there. Right. Have you seen that in your work as a ministry leader, right? Like, you're engaging with thousands of men and thousands of ministry leaders. So like, how much have you seen that reflex to let's suppress, let's ignore, let's not acknowledge, because that's protecting them?
Yeah, 100%. It's probably the reason why we're in the situation we're in. I mean, this is the issue the church has had its head in the sand about for the last 30, 40 years. And we should have been addressing it back in the 60s and 70s.
Yes, and we're having to play catch up.
And 100%. And I'm not saying everybody had their head in the sand. Like, obviously, sure. Piper and there's a lot of people that have been talking about this for Al Mohler. I mean, people have been talking about this, but for the majority, the mainline evangelical mainstream, man, we've just had we've had our head in the sand. And so instead of ignoring what Satan has twisted, man, let's start to unravel it. Mm-hmm. And so it's good. I remember not too long ago, I'm sitting on the couch, I've got my laptop, and everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. And my son sitting next to me, and I'm reading an article on CNN. Okay. Completely just reading an article. And an advertisement for Skims. I think that's I don't know
what you're talking about.
The Kardashians, right? It's her basic like undergarment line, which again, it's most of those little advertisements are softcore porn.
100%.
And it pops up on my screen, and I see my son catch it out of the corner of his eye. And then he looks away, right? So in that moment, I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, do I just click off of this? Do I just go to the next tab? So I didn't. I kid you not, I closed my computer and I said, hey, did you see that image pop up on my screen? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, first of all, you need to know that I wasn't looking at that. Like, I was reading an article. I said, but let's talk about what happens when inadvertently an image pops up, right?
That's so good.
Talk about bouncing our eyes. Let's talk about shielding our eyes. Let's talk about taking that desire to click on that button captive before you get further down the rabbit hole, right? Every moment in my home is a teaching moment. You know, that's that whole Deuteronomy 6, man. Write it on your forehead, write it on your gay post, write it above your door. He says, when you rise, when you lie down, when you go to bed, like it's discipleship as you go. Every moment, whether it's a moment or a milestone, man, there's these teaching moments. And just as a parent, just as a discipler, just being aware that man, don't let moments escape where you can point people to the goodness of God.
Dude, that's so good. And that I think is a better way to put it, where it's, hey, there's no pressure if you incorporate this into every aspect of your parenting, every aspect of as you move through life with your children. And I'm thinking about that as your son for a moment. Like, as you were telling that story, I can put myself there. And what's whirring through my head is, what was dad looking at? Was he searching for that? And how many times unknowingly is a child maybe seeing that happen and thinking that about his dad? And man, for you to stop and say, hey, this just happened. First of all, know that, my integrity is that we're going to talk about it. We're going to stop and we're going to because you wouldn't want that seed to be planted in his mind. But then simultaneously, he is going to encounter thousands, if not millions, of similar situations as he moves through the world, even in middle school, even in high school, even on YouTube, even on the most innocent of platforms. And you're giving him a modality for how to do the exact same thing, because I want to be like dad. How cool is that?
That's it. And to your point earlier, man, you made such a great point. I don't want people to miss it. Like, we as parents, we would do that if our child lied. We would immediately address the lie. If my son hit his sister or vice versa, we would stop immediately and say, hey, this is not okay. But for some odd reason, when it deals with sexuality, we just try to pretend like it wasn't there or like it didn't happen. No. Like lying and acting out in anger, and all these things are products of a broken world. Like we're so quick to address one aspect of it when the most dominating aspect of it in our culture today, this twisted sexuality that is literally everywhere. It's everywhere. It's on billboards as I drive down the street. It's in the shopping mall when I take my kids out. It's on television. It's during the NBA finals. We cannot escape it. We have to start dealing with it head on.
I couldn't agree more. And one thing we like to say in our ministry, in a lot of our sexual integrity work with parents and with individuals who are struggling, it's what Jesus did with his naked body on the cross is redeem that which the enemy is trying to twist and warp with our naked bodies post-fall, right? Like everything from in the garden when they covered themselves with leaves, when they realized they had sinned, Jesus redeemed all that on the cross with his naked body. And so for us, it's a great conversation because it's like, hey, this is good. This doesn't have to be something we shy away from. And I think of all the work that we do with the sextalk.com, encouraging parents to get clear and to get confident, I think you're really kind of hitting the nail on the head. It's like, don't pass go. Number one thing, we want you to destigmatize this and normalize it in your home because God made it and Christ redeemed it on the cross. And there's no reason we can't live in the understanding of, hey, women are made this way. Hey, men are made this way. Hey, this is what marriage to your mom is like, and we're going to exemplify this to you. So, Chris, man, I'm excited for other parents who are listening right now who are going to say, okay, this doesn't sound very hard. Okay, this sounds approachable. So if you only had 2 minutes with a mom or a dad, with a parent, maybe do a dad because you do so much work with men, what would you say to him right now, like looking him in the eyes as like a, hey, you might feel like you're starting too late, but.
Yeah, I would say it's never too late to start. And then the principle I would drive home is you can't pass on what you don't possess.
Oh, that's good.
So as a dad, as a husband, as a father, whatever it is, man, I've got to have good grounding in healthy biblical sexuality if I'm going to pass that on. Doesn't mean I have to be a biblical scholar. Doesn't mean I have to have a PhD in theology. It just means I need to understand God's good design for sex. I need to understand his good design for gender roles if I'm going to pass that on. So So I would encourage, man, any father out there, any mother for that matter, there are some great resources. I mean, we're on one right now, an amazing resource for you to be able to ground yourself into your understanding of a healthy biblical sexuality so that you can pass that on to your children.
Which is so good. And so because of the work that you do and because of the work that I do, the thing that I'm going to guess is going through that dad's head is, but Chris, I still struggle with porn. How am I going to be able to help my kids if I'm still struggling? What would you say to that man? And then I'll equally say what we would say.
Yeah, yeah. It's a, depending on the age of your child, there's a level of vulnerability that's going to give you an even greater influence. But at the same time, the struggle, like sometimes I think, especially in evangelical culture, like we shy away from the fight. When in reality, the fact that I am struggling with sin sometimes is the only proof that I'm alive in Jesus Christ.
That's good.
Because I used to love sin. I used to be okay with sin. I used to justify sin in my mind, right? Now I hate sin. Even though I still fall, even though sometimes I still get ensnared and I still get caught up in sin. Now I hate it, right? And the fact that there's this wrestle with sin in my life is proof, man, that I'm living for righteousness. And so it's okay to share age appropriate. It's okay to share about a struggle. And just because you struggle with something doesn't mean you're disqualified from helping somebody else through it. More times than not, your struggle is a great qualifier for you to move someone along.
Yes. And some of the best conversations I've seen parents have with their children, maybe with their sons specifically, but girls are now struggling with pornography almost just as much as men. So it's not worth saying this is just a man's thing. Yeah. At the right age appropriately, I think it is empowering for your child to know, hey, dad struggled with this. Dad wrestled with this. Dad occasionally still does have to struggle and wrestle through this. It's counterintuitive because I think some parents think that by doing that, you're going to give your children a pass. Your child's going to think, well, dad struggled, so it must not be that big of a deal. But all the parents, and just the way you described it, to say like, hey, this quagmire got me. I went off the path, and you can talk about how like there were negative repercussions, ramifications. It's something I plan to do with my children at the right age, where, when my son, hormones are coming alive, when they're really starting to feel testosterone and attraction and think about dating. Guess what? One of the first conversations I'm going to be having with them is, here's how dad messed up, hurt people, damaged relationships, hurt himself, so that there's no glorification. This was one of dad's biggest battles. And here's what I love to tell men and women if they have a sordid past in this area. What I would then say next is, and one of my greatest desires is for you, my son, is for you, my daughter, to not struggle like I did, to not feel that weight like I did. Because if I can give that gift to you, you will be 10 times better off without having to overcome that struggle, because you can take that struggle and isn't this what God does? He redeems it and he uses it for his glory. So if you're listening right now, I mean, I am that person who had that sordid past. You can use that and redeem that narrative and be that generational curse breaker for your children in these conversations. And that's some of our main motivation, to encourage you to raise up your children in the way that they should go, and then they will not depart from it.
Oh, that's so good, brother. And what a great, I mean, how often do you get to model contrition and repentance in front of your children? I mean, what a great opportunity. I remember years ago being called to pastor, one of my first churches. And I called a professor from Southern Seminary, Dr. Herschel York. And I said, hey, man, I can't do this. Like, I'm not not qualified to do this. He said, what do you mean? I said, man, you don't know some of the stuff I did, like before Jesus in high school. I was a womanizer, like grade A womanizer, and was a terrible human being. Like, I objectified women. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, Chris, when your repentance is more notorious than your sin, you're okay.
Dude, that's good.
He said, you're going to have a platform that a lot of Bible college students and seminarians didn't have, because you're going to have this experience. You're going to have a platform they won't have because of your experiences, your past experiences. And Joel 2 is true. Like, the Lord will restore all that the locusts have eaten.
That's
so
good.
When your children get to this appropriate age, man, what a great picture you can paint to point to the Lord's faithfulness, man. Look at everything he's restored, right? And I'm starting to have those conversations with my son, because one of the main problems today is the objectification of people.
Yes.
I share with men the story of David and Bathsheba. Most people know the story. He sees her bathing, right? But right after that, he sends one of his assistants to go find out who she is. And I love what the assistant does. The assistant immediately knows what's happening. So the assistant comes back and says, hey, that's Bathsheba, the daughter of such and such, the wife of such and such, who, by the way, works for you. Immediately, the assistant personifies Bathsheba. He says, hey, this is somebody's daughter. This is somebody's wife, right? Somebody that's faithful to you. Whereas David was objectifying her, he tried to personify her, and David didn't listen. David saw her as something that he wanted to have. So one of the things I do with my son, like if there's a beautiful woman in the room, and like I catch him staring at that woman, like, bro, that's okay to acknowledge that God made a beautiful creature. But she's not a thing, man. She's somebody's daughter. She's somebody's sister. Like, bro, you've got a sister, right? So like let's train young men to acknowledge that there are beautiful things in this world, but they're not objects.
Yes.
I was with some younger men, some high school boys, college age boys at an NCAA basketball game not too long ago. And I'm walking around this campus, and there are young, beautiful women everywhere. I don't know how young men do it today. I have no idea, bro. And maybe I'm sure there were beautiful women where I went to school 20 years ago. Maybe I wasn't in tune, but they were everywhere. And I had to do this mental exercise. Man, that's somebody's daughter. That's somebody's sister. Like, that's probably somebody's wife. That's somebody's fiance. I'm constantly practicing not objectifying women, right? But that's a daily activity, dude. Like, it's taking every thought captive. Like, this is an uphill climb. You cannot bring a downhill effort, and it does not go away. Like, it is a real thing. And to help my son and to help younger men realize, man, this is where we have to get our minds. That's a great privilege.
Yeah, and I think that's, if you are experiencing it at that level, imagine your son. Like, if you're listening right now, like, imagine your child, because, this is kind of a much more innocent example, but because of my work, I do seem to be hyper aware to some of these things. And so I have younger boys. I have a 3.5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and we're at the splash park literally last week. And my 3.5-year-old, there's this 13-year-old girl who's got a bikini on, and she's running around. And my son's eyes would not stop staring at her. And there was no lust in my 3.5-year-old's heart. He's curious. He's trying to understand the world. He is feeling, even at that age, some kind of attraction to beauty as God made it. And so I'm already processing, man, I'm going to have this conversation early with him. It wasn't in that moment, but I was calling his attention and saying, hey, go play with your brother, and this, like diverting his attention at the age of 3.5. But we live in a world of bikinis and sexuality, and the human body is put on display to be consumed, whether male or female. Right. And as parents, we need to be, as you and your wife are, coming alongside of our kids and coaching them through that at every age, not just when they turn 13.
No, that's exactly right, man. And again, it goes back to foundational principles. We're not saying anything new, right? God, because that woman or because that man was created in the image of God, this is the Imago Dei type stuff here, bro.
Yes.
Like they have an inherent dignity. They have an inherent value. They have an inherent worth. Like they are worthy of our love and our appreciation and our honor, right? And from a young age, we need to be training up our children to see people as image bearers. What did C.S. Lewis say? You've never met a mere mortal. Every being you meet is a miracle.
That's good.
Right? They're the image of God, and this transcends beyond sexuality. This speaks to race.
Mm-hmm.
This speaks to political parties. Right? Before I see somebody as a Republican or a Democrat, like I see them as a child of God. Like that changes everything, how I approach them and how I treat them and how I deal with them. So again, one of those little foundational truths we're teaching from the time they're two, is hey, if you were to ask my 3-year-old right now, why did God make you strong? He would say to help the weak.
Oh, that's amazing.
And if you ask him, hey, why did God make you rich relatively? Then I'm not rich by the world standards, or by the Western standards. He would say to help those who have less than, that have less.
That's amazing.
And another great example of this, dude, is probably one of my most favorite stories. So my 11-year-old has been saying, God's made me strong to help the weak. God's made me strong to help the weak. So I picked him up from school last year. And his PE teacher comes out and says, "Hey, Mr. Harper, can I meet with you for a second?" And typically, again, that's never a good thing. Like, let's meet with you. And I said, "Yeah, sure. What's up?" She said, "Hey, we were doing the 3-legged race today in gym, and she said there's an overweight kid in class that most of the other kids make fun of. And she said, I watched your son walk over and put his arm around him and say, 'Hey, man, I'll be your partner for the race.'"
Wow.
She said, it touched my heart, and I just wanted to share that with you. And if I asked my son, hey, great job helping the weak today, he wouldn't look at that kid and think he's weak. But there's something inside of him that saw somebody being ostracized, that saw somebody being marginalized, and instead of joining the marginalization, he went over to help. Bro, and that's what we're trying to cultivate. And it begins with those simple principles. And listen, if your child's 15 and you haven't started teaching them, guess what? It's not too late. Start teaching it today, man. Start teaching it today. Eventually it'll click.
Exactly. And so, in conclusion, I think that's probably the most important thing we could say. Wherever you are right now, as a listener, if you have a child, if it's 15 and you haven't started, guess what? Get in the game now. There's plenty of time. If they're 3, guess what? You have the best hand dealt to you. You can start now and shape their worldview, their sexuality from a godly design at an early age. So wherever you are and wherever you're listening, right? Like, and as a dad of younger sons, like listening to Chris, your story, and listening to how you and your wife are discipling, shepherding. Like, I want to be a dad like you. I want to have those stories told to me when I pick my son up. And so I think that's really cool, because wherever you are listening right now as a parent, I can say, okay, I know how to do that. It's not a rinse and repeat, but it's discipleship, regular daily engagement around what is the enemy twisting, what has God redeemed. We don't hide things. We don't shove things under the rug. It's out in the open. And we can talk about it. So Chris, thank you so much for sharing like the value to a parent because of the age of your children and the spectrum of the age of your children, I think is so apparent, because whether it's a 3-year-old, whether it's a 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, right? Like that is the gamut. And I'm just excited because of my work. There are so few parents that have the story that you have. And I don't say that to puff you up. I say that to honor you and your wife's work. And so for someone listening right now, equally, like, you got this. And like Chris said, in the middle of this conversation, they are God's first. And so God has this. So pressure's off. Pray and cover your children. Seek the face of the Lord as you step into this conversation. We don't do any of this in our own strength. And God will walk alongside of you as you shepherd and disciple your children to have a biblical sexuality.
Come on. Such a good word, man. Thank you so much for letting me be with you today, brother. Really encouraged.
Super honored, Chris. We'll have you on again soon.
Come on, brother. Have a good one.
All right, you too.
Welcome to thesextalk.com, where parents can go to get clear and confident to have the sex talk with their kids.
Because I think sometimes we think we're the first generation of Christians who's had to live in a sexually depraved society, and we're not.
We are so glad that there is material like this for our world.
We ourselves are often nervous about having the conversations with our kids.
The sex talk is about so much more than the birds and the bees or explaining to your kids where babies come from.
In that, we need to come alongside them and serve as a coach.
We only have a window of time to invest in our children.
What do you wish you would have had when you were 12?
We're going to take a journey that might be a bit uncomfortable, but if we will pass through the truth shall make us free.
It is such an important conversation for you to have with your children, and we are just so thankful that it's now available.
What these conversations are, I think, is something that our culture and society need to be having holistically.
Because we do believe that it is life-changing for you, your marriage, for your family, and for your child. We are so honored to be your guides throughout each session of this course. So let's jump in.